In this video, I want to talk about one of my absolute favorite techniques, which is a jig. And specifically, we're going to talk about fall time jig fishing. You know, throughout the entire year, you can catch fish on a jig, but it's definitely one of my favorite. It's one of my go-to baits in the fall. And one of the biggest reasons is that bass really start to feed a little bit more on crawdads as those water temperatures really start to go down. Now, not saying that they didn't feed on them throughout the summer, but they definitely start to focus a little bit more on crayfish throughout the fall. And that's why a jig becomes just something that I pick up. Now, there are three patterns that I always look for when it comes to fishing a jig. They are all big fish patterns, and we're going to talk about those in this video. Now, before we get into it, this one's brought to you by my apparel company, Fin Fishing. Right now, for the month of October 2024, I am running a package deal over on the website. You can get a USA-made sun shirt and a bass hat with a wooden bass badge for $67. So it's a great deal, and it's really easy. All you gotta do, add the sun shirt that you want to cart, add the hat that you want to cart, and you will see that automatic discount at checkout. Thank you to all of you who have shopped at Fin Fishing in the past. I mean it with the most sincerity. It makes a huge difference for me and my family and for this channel. All right, let's talk about jig fishing. Now, real quick, before I get into these three big patterns, I do want to make it known that I think that the biggest mistake that a lot of anglers make when it comes to fishing a jig is simply not keeping this in their hand. It is, every time I post a video about fishing a jig, I see a lot of anglers saying, I just do not have confidence with it. It feels weird, it feels heavy. They just don't really love that. And it's so easy for us to take a bait like this that may be newer and to put it down after 20 minutes, 30 minutes, even an hour. And sometimes it really takes a full day of fishing this bait, and definitely just a couple of fish catches. If you can go out there and catch one fish, two fish, three fish, you will gain a huge amount of confidence in a jig. So if you are not confident in this bait, keep it locked in your hand. I'm telling you what, this is the time of the year to do it. They will eat a jig during this time of the year. Now, with that being said, let's talk about a few patterns that I always look for. Now, the first one is going to be muddy water creek arms. As we know, a lot of times in the fall, you're gonna have some weather systems that move in. And a lot of times when they move in, they're going to rain. You're going to have some different parts of your lake that start to get a little bit off color and even muddy. In those areas, especially if you have some wood cover, this is something, or rock cover, but a lot of times in wood cover, I'm just going to pick up my jig, I'm gonna start flipping and pitching. So the big thing is that I'm really trying to figure out, especially as you get later in the fall and that water temperature starts to go down, I'm trying to figure out where the bass are in these creeks and in these pockets. Sometimes you will find them in the very back of the pocket around some wood cover, and then other times you will find them in different areas. But the big thing is this is very simple fishing. You can do it whether you have electronics in your boat or not. You're just gonna look at the bank, look at what looks good, and flip or pitch your jig right next to that cover. And a lot of times it's, to work a bait, you're literally just lifting it up, hopping it off the bottom a few times, and that's about it. And then I'm gonna reel it up, I'm gonna pitch it to the next piece of cover. So it's a really easy way to fish a jig. And I'm telling you what, a lot of times in that muddy water, those fish like to get really tight to cover. We've talked about this a little bit on the channel, but in that mud, they really like to get tight to the cover. And so a jig is a great bait. It comes through any type of cover that you got. It really does. It can come through it all. And it's a great bait that, because it's kind of bulky in that muddy water, it displaces more water. And so therefore it's a little bit easier for the bass to hone in on because of its bulkiness, because of the presence that it has. So it is a great technique. And it's, like I said, it's really easy. I'm picking up a flipping stick and I'm just flipping at all the cover that I can. And if you have, for example, if you have docks in your lake, you might be skipping it up under docks. Now, if you have a lot of grass in your lake, you can definitely still catch fish on a jig in a grass lake. But what you see in grass lakes is that grass really works as a filter. And I'm not saying that you're not gonna have some muddy water on the lake somewhere, but because you have grass on that lake, it really filters out the water, and you will have a little bit cleaner water. So you might be able to fish this on the outside of grass lines. You might be able to fish this on docks if your lake has docks still, but you may not have those real muddy water lakes that have, you know, a lot of lay down logs and stumps and hard cover for the bass to get around. But that's a great pattern. It's one that I always look for because it's just so much fun. I love it. You could turn the electronics off and just flip and pitch. Now, let's talk about pattern number 2. And this is kind of a later fall pattern. And I've talked about this several times. This is one of my favorite ways to catch really big fish. And what I'm gonna look for is creek channel swing banks within major creek arms. A lot of times as these fish start to kind of transition to deeper water, one of the places that they will go is on these creek channel swing banks. And if you don't know what I mean by a creek channel swing bank, a lot of lakes that are reservoirs, you know, they have a main river that goes through them that was flooded. They also have a lot of different creek arms that were flooded. And anywhere that you have that main creek, and you can see this on a topographical map, anywhere you have that creek that actually hits against the bank, you're going to have a very steep bank there, and that's what we call a creek channel swing bank. Those banks can be dynamite for late fall bass. And one of the primary things that I use to catch those fish is a jig. And again, this is very simple fishing, but in this case, I'm not always looking for muddy water. You can do this a lot of times in clear water, but I'm going to cast this thing literally to the bank, and I'm going to work it down that very steep stair step bank. And I've talked about this before, but there are days where you find that a lot of bass are within the first couple feet. You will catch them, you know, you cast your bait to the bank, you let it fall down maybe a foot or two, and that's where you get bit. There are other days where you actually work that bait really deep, and you are catching fish that are also really deep, maybe in 15 or 20 foot of water. So, and it may be less deep than that, it may be more deep than that, depending on the water that you are fishing. So in that situation, I'm using a 1/2 ounce jig. A lot of times, to me, it is the perfect amount of weight in a jig to get that bait down deep, to be able to work it efficiently and thoroughly, but also it's not too much weight where you're getting caught in all the hangs quite as much on really those steeper banks. So you might be catching fish that are relating to wood. You may be catching fish that are relating to rock on these creek channel swings. But one of the biggest things that you should do is focus on the transitional areas. I'm talking about a creek channel swing, but where that creek channel actually starts to swing away from the bank, you kind of go from a bank that's flatter to a bank that's a little bit deeper. We call that a transition. That area, that zone is a hot spot. That is definitely an area that I'm going to spend a little bit of extra time and really work that bank. You also have times where that creek channel will actually kind of actually end where a point is. Maybe you have a point in the bank and that creek channel swings right up against that point, and that can be another really big key hot spot. So creek channel swing banks, you can do this pretty much until you have ice on your lakes, if your lakes even get ice, because the fish will relate to those things year round, and they will relate to them in creeks. They will also relate to them on the main river. When you have main river channels, these tend to be very bluffy, and you will have fish that live there throughout the entire winter. Okay, the last thing that I want to talk about when it comes to the last pattern that I look for is cover on main lake points. During kind of the entire fall, you're going to have fish that relate to main lake points. Year round, they're going to relate to main lake points, but definitely in the fall, because you have bait fish on a lot of these major points. Now, if you have cover in the form of rock piles or brush piles on these areas, again, a great bait to drag through those brush piles, those rock piles, is a jig. Now, this is going to kind of take a little bit more time to figure out. It's really going to help you to have kind of the right electronic setup to be able to idle around, look for rock piles, look for bait, look for brush piles, mark those things, and swing back around and fish that jig through them. But that is also a very good technique to catch some really big fish. Not only largemouth, but also smallmouth. Smallmouth seem to love bigger, not necessarily huge, but big jigs in the fall. It's a great bait to catch some really big fish. All right, guys, hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, give it a thumbs up. Also, don't forget to check out that fin fishing gear, and I will see you guys tomorrow.